Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another edition of Hashtag Badge Chat Show and Tell live on the YouTube. We are joined this week by Justin Mason. Justin, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for inviting me. This is awesome.
Justin, for those of you who haven't been paying attention this year, has been just a huge contributor in the Hashtag Badge Chat community. You can follow him on Twitter at captain_info. And Justin, before we hear about you, you got to tell us about your Twitter handle. What's the story behind that awesome handle?
It's not an awesome handle. I wish I would have picked a better one. I used to be a reference librarian. And so at the time I was Captain Info, but that one was taken on Twitter. So I thought, I'll just shorten it and put an underscore in there. I wish I'd picked something else, but I think I'm stuck with it now.
I'll fanboy on the brand. I personally do love it. But for those of our viewers who want to get to know you beyond just your Twitter handle, maybe just start us out before we get into badge credential heavy with just what you're kind of doing now to change the world and how that's led you to digital badge credentials.
Yeah, so my day job is I'm the director of e-learning at the University of Montana Western. And I've been here for just a little under a year, working to, make the e-learning happen here. And slowly bringing, I think, probably some digital credential or digital badging, hopefully, to the campus. In my spare time, I'm an advocate for open recognition and open badges. So I'm very turned on by the idea of anything that empowers learners, right, to kind of in some way own their own learning.
Sorry, I don't know if you just heard those tires screeching. I got a little distracted there. That was
didn't hear.
Pretty loud car accident outside. Yeah, sorry, I got a little thrown off there. So Justin, folks who are watching this, whether you're in real time with us, by the way, feel free to tweet questions on hashtag BadgeChat on Twitter, and we'll make sure to get your questions for Justin answered live on the air. Anybody who's watching this, whether it's live or asynchronously finding it on YouTube, is probably familiar enough with digital badges. But you also just mentioned open recognition, which has a lot of overlapping, but in sort of the way that squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. Maybe you could just share a little bit about what is open recognition for you and your passion around it.
Sure. So open recognition for me, I've been very interested in the idea of being able to self-issue open badges, and again, that's just a way of helping a learner in some way own their own learning. So try to provide a workflow for people to document their own learning and make it visible and help other people see what they're doing. Open recognition is, I think, of course, it's very well aligned with open badges. And there is, I think for folks who've been in the open badges community, there's sort of this philosophy or ethos of openness, right, that goes with open badges. Open recognition tries to take that a step further in saying that you can recognize learning that happens informally or non-formally, but there's also interesting recognition that happens between people. For instance, you might have someone who is, say, the local computer expert at your workplace, or you know someone who's an excellent public speaker, or know someone who's an expert in some domain. Recognition is just about recognizing that as an individual or a community, and it doesn't necessarily have to be associated with a formal class or a formal credential, right?
And for folks who are kind of all of a sudden thinking, wait, that sounds familiar. I mean, LinkedIn kind of started that years and years ago. In what ways is there overlap with LinkedIn's form of recognition and the work that really interests you? And in what ways do you think the work that really interests you and that you're leading is kind of next level from that?
Well, I think that Open Badges 2.0 specification is what enables the sort of recognition we're talking about to be next level. So the LinkedIn form of endorsements was, it was an interesting feature, but just what happened, I can tell you what happened to me is that I got a lot of endorsements on LinkedIn for skills that I didn't even know I had and hadn't really even posted on there, and from people who maybe didn't have the background to be you know, if someone didn't have an education background or a technical background, yet they were endorsing me on LinkedIn for, you know, being able to create a database or being able to do this or that. You know, it's kind of like, well, thanks, but, you know, I'm not, you know, I'm not sure how, yeah, I mean, how much weight do you really assign that endorsement? It kind of seems like there was sort of a quid pro quo where people would endorse you with the hopeful expectation that you might endorse them back for skills.
Totally.
So the endorsement feature of the 2.0 specification of Open Badges, I think goes above and beyond that, in that it enables us to not only endorse someone for the competencies they have or the experiences that they've had, but then to add a little bit more of a narrative on why you're endorsing them, right? And then I think that we're getting to a time now where we might even be looking at what capabilities does the fact that all of these open badges are networked, what does that afford? What kind of new ways of understanding endorsements does that afford? Like, does someone who has a PhD in a particular discipline, does their endorsement of a skill weigh heavier than someone else's? I don't know, but I think that's the kind of question where we're getting to.
Totally, and I know that Kim over at Badger Team just shared a few minutes ago a link to a blog post you've written on ranking algorithms, so maybe we'll talk about that. And I was kind of laughing because you know, the not just the quid pro quo nature of the old form of LinkedIn endorsements, but also I was the person who would have been, just as a creative writing exercise, endorsing you and having successfully gotten to the center of a Tootsie Pop or something, just completely frivolous and meaningless endorsements. And I think that that's another piece that you talk about with the, you know, the assertion piece, and, you know, with this OBI 2.0 that we can get to a place where maybe there's just more meaningfulness to it. And I think trust would you think it's fair to say that kind of trust is also at the heart of what you're addressing there?
Yeah. Trust, I think, especially for my interest, is that you know, self-issuing badges. Trust is obviously plays a role in that, because why should you trust me that I've, you know, with this badge that I've issued to myself? And absolutely, the Open Badges enables the sort of evidence-backed claims. Well, it enables us to add evidence to our claims, right? And it enables us to make everything behind our claim hopefully transparent.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And for folks who are just joining, we're with Justin Mason. He is at Captain_info. You can tweet your questions to Justin live on the air using #BadgeChat on Twitter. And Justin, in the comments to this video, there's a link that people can actually go and endorse you for a self-issued badge for appearing on BadgeChat. So maybe that might be just sort of a concrete exemplar that we can maybe talk through as a way of highlighting what you're talking about right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like the idea of folks who advocate for the use of digital open badges to, you know, incorporate the use of open badges into what they do. And this is an example of me eating my own dog food, I guess. I wish I could think of a better expression than that, but that's just what comes to mind right now.
We know what you mean. We know what you mean.
Yeah. Well,
and so you, I know you have some kind of stuff that you can screen share with us. That might be a good sort of transition here for us to go ahead and dive into kind of some of this thinking that you have that I just think is so far out and just really, I just, if it's at the risk of over foreshadowing for people, I think you just take this really awesome nuanced idea and make it really accessible and simple to where it's like, yeah, why haven't we thought about that? And so maybe you could just sort of introduce it to folks and we'll take it from there. And feel free to go ahead and share your screen as well.
Okay, great. Okay, can you see my screen all right?
We can see it perfectly, Justin.
Okay. So I'm just going to run through my slides and feel free to interject with any questions.
Absolutely.
Okay. So this was a presentation that I gave at Badge Summit in June of 2018 on self-issuing open badges and trying to make it reputable. So just to clarify what I mean by self-issuing open badges, what I mean is very literal. Imagine a learner who has a learning experience and then issues an open digital badge to herself in order to document that experience. And that probably sounds weird because badges are so often identified with credentials. And how can issuing a credential to yourself be reputable? Because usually when we discover that someone has issued a credential to themselves, we call it illegitimate or even a forgery. And I don't think that it's true that badges are necessarily credentials, although they certainly can be credentials, and they often are. But for this particular use case, I've come to think of self-issued open badges not as credentials, but as claims. They're claims that I make about myself, about my accomplishments, my learning experiences, and my competencies. And claims and credentials are certainly related. In fact, I think it's not out of line to say that we can understand credentials as a kind of claim, one usually made by an authority about an individual. For example, the W3C Verifiable Credentials Group has defined a credential as a set of one or more claims made by the same entity. By understanding badges as claims rather than credentials, at least in this current use case, we can partly diffuse that reaction of seeing self-issued badges as illegitimate or even as a forgery. Because when we accuse someone of forgery, I think what we're accusing them of is sort of usurping that authoritative voice of the traditional credential issuer. But if a person makes a claim about themselves, it's less problematic because we make claims about ourselves all the time. When we write a resume, we make claims about our experiences and competencies. And usually those claims that we write on a resume, they have to be accepted on face value because it's not easy for someone reading a resume to really verify the truth of those claims, right? And that's where open badges come in, and especially the 2.0 specification, because like resumes, open badges can represent claims that we make about ourselves. But open badges also contain data that enable us to back up those claims with evidence. So for example, I gave this presentation at Badge Summit. When I gave this presentation, I issued a badge to myself for presenting on the topic of self-issued badges. And in the badge metadata, I provided a link to the Badge Summit schedule, which listed me as a presenter. And I've done that again here today. The 2.0 specification also has this feature that allows other people and organizations to endorse you. The endorsement feature is relevant to this use case because when someone self-issues a badge in order to make a claim about themselves, other people can endorse that claim as true and thereby provide further evidence to support the claim.
And I think as you go, and I love this graphic that you're sharing here from Serge. I think that, going to that concrete idea of a resume, that if we view the things we list typically at the bottom of a resume in the skills and interests section, that those are claims, right? And that those are very difficult to verify. I think that the kind of illegitimate word is definitely really strong, but it's definitely it doesn't necessarily carry with it, to go back to the word you started with, it is reputable, right? How do we make it reputable? And it seems that by enabling the ability for others to endorse you in those claims and saying, yes, thumbs up, Justin does have those. I think that's where reputation and trust starts to come in. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great lead into this graphic right here. But because that's part of what makes this idea of open recognition resonate so well with me, is that it's not just an authority that is issuing and recognizing what I can do. It's others. We all have this ability to recognize other people for their achievements and their skills. So
and
like
maybe
you said,
it might be helpful for folks who are looking at this thinking, okay, there's big words here. I have a college degree. I can understand all the letters, but I'm not understanding the graphic. Maybe kind of help people understand the relationship here between formal and non-formal, which I think really gets at what you were just hinting at, and the past and future axis as well.
You bet. Okay, so the plane recognition, the plane represents recognition along these two axes. The x-axis is a continuum between traditional recognition on the left and non-traditional recognition on the right, and the y-axis is a continuum between formal recognition on the bottom and non-formal recognition on the top. So traditional tends to be more focused on the past, more static. For instance, when I graduated from high school, I got a diploma. But as I continue to grow, that diploma doesn't continue to change to reflect things that happen in my life. It's more of a static recognition of what I did in high school. Whereas the future and dynamic kind of recognition on the other side of that x-axis would be recognition that, say, recognizes maybe my professional trajectory, right? Where I'm heading, what my hopes are and goals, and maybe even my interests. And then the y-axis is formal and non-formal. So formal, obviously, that's recognition that comes from some authority, whereas non-formal, this is recognition that can come from individuals and can come from communities. And these two axes, they divide the plane of recognition into 4 quadrants. And Serge characterizes recognition in the upper right quadrant, which is non-traditional and non-formal, as tending to foster learner empowerment. This is kind of the learner taking control of his or her own learning. And it was Serge's presentation in this graph that kind of sparked this idea to try to self-issue open badges in a way that is reputable.
And to give concrete sort of examples, Justin, just to make sure that myself and anybody who's watched this are kind of following you, I would think of the example you gave of that high school diploma being the bottom left quadrant of this graph, yes?
Yes.
And, when we think of maybe the top right-hand corner, my mind almost goes to like a DIY.org or a Tapia, where I'm saying, here's this thing I can do with a soccer ball, and I am going to go ahead and give myself recognition for it. And along with that, I'm going to upload a video proving that I did it so that other people can endorse me in it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So if I have time here.
Absolutely.
I think I'll just run through the coming slides, which are a use case for how a learner could document her own learning or professional development. So here we have someone who states that she'd like to get better at writing project charters. And project charters are documents written by project managers in order to provide an initial outline and a framework for a project. So let's assume that our learner is a professional whose title isn't necessarily project manager, but who nonetheless has need of project management skills in her work, which I think is a pretty common scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a conventional approach for someone wanting to do this is to take formal classes and earn a certificate. But there might be a number of reasons why that isn't a good option for our learner. For instance, there might not be any project management courses in her area, or she has other obligations, or maybe she's already doing project management as part of her job, And she believes that she should be able to develop her skills and earn recognition without taking a traditional formal class. So she's decided to document her own learning journey. And as a first step, she identifies a competency or a goal that she's interested in developing or achieving, or that she believes she has already developed or achieved. Step 2, the learner adds a competency or a goal to a pathway. And pathways, these are organized collections of badges, goals, competency statements, and possibly other elements that can represent things like badge hierarchies, preferred sequences of learning, and even the scope of a curriculum. But for our purposes, in this use case, the important thing to note is that the elements or the nodes in a pathway can be more than badges. Nodes can also be competency statements or goals, and our learner has added a competency statement as a node to her pathway.
For folks who were going back to your very first slide, Justin, for folks who saw the word stackable.
Oh, is that okay?
Do you mind kind of just explain how this graphic here might help people wrap their heads around the notion of stackable?
You bet. So at the top, we have this competency labeled meta competency to manage projects successfully, which is really just a competency about that ability to manage projects. And underneath that, we have a lot of sub-competencies. Typically, the way this works is a learner will start by earning all of the sub-competencies, right? Let's say there are badges. There's a badge that's attached to each one of these competency statements. A very conventional approach would be that the learner begins by earning the project charter badge, and then the scope badge, and then the budget badge. And then once she has earned all of those badges sort of stack up to create this meta competency badge. She unlocks that higher level badge. And you can have nested hierarchies that show or represent an entire educational program, right? So competencies nested inside of competencies. I don't know if that clarifies things or not, but the way
I'm nodding along. It definitely made sense to me. Hopefully, it made sense to others as well.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So I think we're used to seeing those on a pathway, a lot of badges that are the nodes in the pathway, but we can also have competency statements as nodes. And we're very accustomed to these badge pathways being designed by an authoritative badge issuer. But in this case, right, the badge issuer is also the badge earner. And so our learner is the one who has designed her own pathway. So like I said, she placed this meta competency at the top, which is about managing projects successfully. But below that, she's listed many subcategories. And the one she's focusing on right now is project charter, which is a competency statement that she could have written by herself. And in a lot of cases, I think she'd have good reason for writing her own competency statement. In this case, she chose to use a statement that was written by a recognized authority, PMI, which is the Project Management Institute. And in fact, she's modeled her whole pathway based on PMI's knowledge areas. And one reason that she might do this is to provide potential badge consumers with a recognized benchmark against which they can better, more easily understand the claims that she's making about herself. Okay.
So in other words, we're mixing this sort of organic bottom up, if you will, kind of way of recognizing learning achievement with a more standardized approach of kind of something that would allow a consumer, as you said, to see things apples to apples between different earners.
Right. Yeah. I think that using recognized competency frameworks allows consumers to, like you say, recognize things apples to apples, oranges to oranges. And the upside down way that we'll get to, that I'll get to here for stacking badges, I think also is consistent with a more conventional approach to the tiered pathway design. Okay, so in step 3, the learner earns badges that support the claim of the competency statement or that serve as evidence of progress toward the stated goal. Badges can be self-issued or earned from other issuers. Here we see that instead of earning only one badge for the competency statement, our learner has earned several. We also see that the badges are from different sources. So the badge at the far left is a non-credit online course, is from a non-credit online course such as a MOOC. And the second badge from the left is from a workshop that she attended. The two badges on the right are ones that she issued to herself for project charters that she wrote at work. So there are a few things that I think are worth pointing out here. One, there is no predetermined limit or threshold to how many badges she can or should earn. She can earn as many as she wants in order to support her claim to be able to write project charters. And the more badges she earns, the more compelling her claim begins to look. Two, there needn't be any one recognized authority who's going to stamp her learning as valid or meaningful. Three, she identifies the badges that she issues to herself as self-issued badges because, again, we're not trying to think of her self-issued badges as credentials, but rather as claims. She's not trying to take on that stance of a traditional issuing authority. Four, by associating a competency statement with many badges rather than just one, I think we somewhat change how we think about the validity of the learner's claims to possess a competency. So Dan Hickey has commented that badges, and especially badges associated with competency-based assessments, should be concerned about validity, that is, how well the evidence supports the claim made in the badge. When a competency claim is associated with only one badge, the entire weight of the claim rests on that badge. And we in the badge community, we get to have a lot of discussions about how rigorous badges ought to be and how many badge levels do we need in order to represent a competency. But in this case, there are no levels. More badges earned simply function as more evidence supporting the learner's claim to be developing or to already possess a given competency. Fifth, I included a workshop attendance badge, which is the second from the left, because it's the sort of badge that gets characterized pejoratively as a lightweight badge, right? Mm-hmm. It's a fluff badge because it lacks the rigor and assessment that's usually needed to support a respectable credential. And folks who advocate against issuing such badges, I think, have a good point to make, a good case, especially if we're thinking of badges as credentials. But in this case, at least, the issue of lightweight badges seems less problematic because its purpose isn't to be the sole bearer of the weight of the learner's claims, but instead it's just one more bit of evidence. Okay.
I really like where you're going there, Justin. Especially like you said, that there's this pejorative sort of bias towards participation badges, if you will, and that when they are part of a larger whole, however, they can really be valid, and that is something that we want to know about our project manager, that she attended this workshop that we've been hearing about where they unveiled the latest and greatest skills and tools, and we're glad to know that she was there and that helps us make a decision in hiring her, right?
Right. Yeah, I think part of this is the idea that a collection of badges can represent, can serve as evidence of a given competency at least as well as any individual badge, right? Like a collection of badges, that collection has meaning as well.
Great point.
Yeah. Okay, so step 4, the learner's supporting badges are endorsed by others. And here again, the more evidence badges she earns and the more endorsements that she's able to get, the more compelling her claim looks. And so, it's in this learner's best interest to, if she self-issues a badge, she can then share that badge with coworkers or with supervisors who are then able to not only testify to the factual truth of that claim, right, but they might be able to offer evaluations of maybe the work that she's done, or the quality or its effectiveness. So in a nutshell, and I know we're running towards the end of the time here, kind of this upside down approach that I've been advocating. The idea, what differentiates it from a standard approach? Well, in a standard approach, the authority designs the pathway and the learner's job is to follow the path. So they start by earning the child badges, and only then do they earn that meta badge. But for learners designing their own pathways, that doesn't work so great because because they don't always know where they're headed and where learning opportunities are going to arise for them, right? Like a month ago, I could have had no idea that I was going to be here talking with you on Badge Chat. So the learners need something that's more dynamic if they're going to design their own pathways. And the way, at least in my head, the way this makes sense is that you begin with this parent competency and then add child badges to that as evidence. And again, the more evidence badges you get and the more endorsements you get, the more compelling this claim, whatever it is, begins to look.
So in other words, we're starting with potential claims we might want to make, and then we figure out how to successfully demonstrate that we are deserving of that claim, as opposed to doing something and then figuring out what claim might we make on it.
Right, yeah. So we identify a goal or some competency that we want to show that we have. And then it's a process of, as opportunities to demonstrate that competency or to pursue that goal, as those arise, we can then continually add badges as evidence to support whatever that claim is that we're making.
Awesome. And I do know I have all these other questions, but we are running short on time, so I might let you kind of cruise along with your next stuff here.
Yeah, okay. So something that I'm interested in right now is this, because we're creating this cluster of badges around a given competency. We're at a time now where we're seeing the emergence of algorithms that will rank badges. Right? Badger last year, Concentric Sky announced the release of this tool that calls BadgeRank, which uses an algorithm to rank the relative value of badges, which using a number of criteria such as endorsements and outcomes. So an interesting implication to this is that there's a sense in which if we can assign a weight, a value to each one of our badges, it seems to me that probably we could sum that weight, right? We could sum that up and then come up with a rough weight of that is then associated with this competency statement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, if I understand you correctly, it allows us to take, our need for kind of more objective data and use that in order to help us signal among one another, the reputability, if you will, to go back to one of the words you started with, of one of these claims that we're making.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly it. So I'm hoping that we in the badging community can start to have conversations around, like, well, what does it mean when we start to look at, start to use algorithms to, like assign weights to badges? This is pretty exciting to me because at least for badge consumers, if this is indeed possible, and I think it is, it seems to me that this has the potential to make badges, and especially badges that are used to support these competency statements about ourselves, a bit more accessible to badge consumers, right? So I'm very interested to kind of see where this leads.
Well, I know we're over our time, but just one exciting place as I look at that, going back to where we, the example that we shared of LinkedIn endorsements, that, the from is this not trusted, total, as you put it, quid pro quo situation of, I'll say you're good at it if you'll say I'm good at something, and move from that to an ecosystem in which maybe if I know that my reputation's on the line as an endorser, right? That that my ranking as an endorser is at stake here, and that the more I don't want to use the word fidelity, but the better, just the more trustworthy I am, the more integrity I bring to the process. maybe the ranking weight of my endorsement moves from a 0.5 to a 2, right? And that maybe helps people stay a little bit more honest and just bring to the world of recognition I guess, just trustworthiness that we need in order to be able to look at different claims, as you put it, and say, that's a valid claim.
Yeah. And the thing that really excites me that keeps me excited about open badges is the idea that this is an opportunity for learners to still own their own data, right? I mean, this is data that they are accumulating and curating about themselves, but it's learner-owned data as opposed to, a lot of these kind of, I've watched a lot of talent management startups emerging where it seems like the pitch is that we can use AI and we can use big data and we can, these services are going to track the talent and the competencies of other people. But in that case, it's not the learner who's tracking it. It's somebody else. It's a platform that's tracking it. I like open badges because I think it creates this opportunity for learners to, again, own their own data in what I hope is a very literal way.
And such powerful stuff. And I think that's a great place for us to wind down, and for everybody else to see why I'm such a big fanboy of Justin. And if you missed him at Badge Summit in 2018, hopefully you'll be able to see him leading a Open Recognition Unconference during Badge Summit 2019 on June 22nd in Philadelphia. And I think we're okay to say, even though it's not totally official, but thanks in large part to Justin's efforts, actually, we're going to be hosted at Temple University, and information about that will be going live very soon at bit.ly/Badge Summit. You can follow Justin at Captain_info on the Twitters. And if you're ever in, we didn't hear where in Montana your university is.
It's in Dillon, Montana, southwest corner.
If you are ever in the southwest corner of Montana, in Dillon, Montana, you'll have to stop by and say hi to Justin. Justin, thank you so much for taking time out of your Monday afternoon to share just some really awesome out there thinking with us.
Thank you for the invitation. This was super fun. I appreciate it.
No, I just am totally geeking out on your work and can't wait to see where it goes next. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you everybody who watched live, and for those of you who watch asynchronously on YouTube, we appreciate you, and we recognize your own contributions to the field and hope you have a badge-worthy week. Bye-bye, everybody.